The Great Hall of the Galactic conquered, stretched for nearly a mile in every direction. Its domed ceiling showed the stars themselves projected in real time from sensors mounted on the station's hull. Thousands of seats rose in circular tiers around a central platform where speakers addressed the assembly. Representatives from 214 species filled those seats, their forms ranging from the insecta to the reptilian to things that defied easy description. High Chancellor Morvet stood at the central podium, her silver robes catching the light from the artificial stars above. She was old for her species, nearly 400 years, and she had presided over this summit for the last 60 of them. Her voice carried easily through the translation systems that made communication possible between so many different kinds of minds. We begin the roll call of member species and invited observers, she announced. Let the record show attendance for the 47th Annual Summit of Sentient Species. The names came in alphabetical order, according to the Concord Standard Linguistic Protocols. The Authority Collective answered present. The Belmuthy Trade Union answered present. On and on it went, a ritual that took nearly an hour to complete. Terran Confederation, the automated system announced. Silence fell over the great hall. Every eye, every sensory organ, every method of perception turned toward a single empty seat in the observer section. The chair had been placed there 47 years ago, when humanity first received an invitation to join the galactic community. It had never been occupied. Terran Confederation. The system repeated after the standard pause. Nothing. The chair remained empty. A ripple of murmurs passed through the assembly. High Chancellor Morph made a small notation on her display. Let the record show that the Terran Confederation has declined attendance for the 47th consecutive year. We shall proceed with the agenda. From his seat in the upper tiers, Ambassador Breath of the Colossi Dominion let out a bark of laughter. He was a large being covered in scales that shifted color with his mood. Right now, they showed the deep purple of contempt. Why do we even bother? He called out, his voice cutting through the formal silence. The humans are primitive isolationists hiding behind their single star. They have nothing to offer the conquered and nothing to contribute to galactic civilization. I move that we stop wasting time with invitations they will never accept. Several delegates voiced their agreement. The humans were a minor species at best, occupying a small and unremarkable region of space near the galaxy's outer edge. They had been discovered 8 decades ago by a routine survey mission and had been largely ignored ever since. High Chancellor Morph raised a hand for silence. The invitation remains open as a matter of protocol. All space-faring species are entitled to representation in this body. If the humans choose not to exercise that right, it is their loss. The matter was dropped as it was dropped every year, and the summit moved on to more pressing concerns. Primary topic of discussion was the Rakari hegemony. For the past 30 years, the Rakari had been expanding their territory through conquest. They were a warrior species, proud and ruthless, and they had developed a taste for empire. Dozens of smaller species had already fallen under their rule. Millions of beings now lived as slaves in Vicari space, working in mines and factories to fuel the war machine. Ambassador Karath of the Verkari hegemony sat in his Delegation section, his scarred face, showing no expression as speaker after. Speaker condemned his government's actions. He had heard it all before. Condemnation without consequence. Outrage without action. The conquered must respond to this aggression, declared the representative from the Salathi Republic. We cannot stand by while entire civilizations are enslaved, and what would you have us do, Ambassador? Breath replied, go to war with the hegemony. The cost would be catastrophic. We must pursue diplomatic solutions. We have pursued diplomatic solutions for 30 years, the Salafi representative shot back. How many more species must fall before we admit that diplomacy has failed? The debate continued for hours. Proposals were made and rejected. Sanctions were discussed and deemed insufficient. Military intervention was raised and quickly abandoned as too risky, too expensive, too likely to fail. In the end, though, summit produced what it had always produced, a strongly worded statement of concern. The Varari ambassador accepted the document with barely concealed amusement and assured the assembly that his government would give it all due consideration. High Chancellor Morth watched him go with a heavy heart. She had been presiding over this body for 6 decades, and she had seen this pattern repeat itself too many times to count. The powerful did as they pleased. The weak suffered, and the conquered held meetings. Late that evening, after the formal sessions had ended, Morth retired to her private chambers aboard the station. Her aide, a young member of her species named Torf, was waiting with reports and updates. The summit concluded as expected, Morvith said wearily. Another year of accomplishing nothing. Chancellor, there is something you should see. Torb's voice carried an unusual note of concern. Our intelligence division has flagged some unusual activity in the outer regions. Morth accepted the data tablet he offered and studied the contents. Her eyes widened. The reports detailed sightings of unknown vessels in deep space far from any established trade routes or territorial boundaries. The ships were large, larger than anything the Concord's members operated, and they moved with a speed and precision that suggested technology well beyond current standards. Whenever Concord patrols attempted to approach, the ships vanished. These sightings span the last 40 years, Morvis said slowly. Why am I only seeing this now? The reports were filed separately by different patrol commanders in different regions, Torpth explained. No one connected them until one of our analysts ran a pattern recognition study. Chancellor, the origin trajectories all point to the same region of space. Which region? Torv hesitated. Human space. Morv sat down the tablet. For a long moment, she simply stared at the wall, processing the implications. The humans had been dismissed as primitives, isolationists, a species too backward or too frightened to engage with galactic civilization. But if these reports were accurate, has anyone else seen this analysis? She asked. No, Chancellor. The analyst brought it directly to me, and I brought it directly to you. Good, keep it that way. Morvith picked up the tablet again and studied the data more carefully. The ships in these sightings were not small scout craft or exploration vessels. They were warships. I want continuous monitoring of human space, passive sensors only, nothing that might be detected, and I want daily reports sent to me personally. Yes, Chancellor. May I ask what you suspect? Morvth was quiet. For a long time before answering, I suspect that we have made a very dangerous assumption. We assume that silence meant weakness. We assume that absence meant irrelevance. She looked up at the artificial stars visible through her window. What if we were wrong? Across the galaxy, in a cramped office, aboard a station orbiting a world that Concord had never bothered to visit, a young analyst named Yuki Tanaka was coming to a similar conclusion. Tanaka worked for the Concord's intelligence division, assigned to the thankless task of monitoring species that the Concord considered unimportant. Humanity was at the top of that list. For 3 years, she had reviewed every scrap of data related to the Terran Confederation, and for 3 years she had found nothing of interest until now. It had started with a simple question: why did they humans stop attending summits after their first 3 appearances? The official explanation was that they had found the proceedings boring or irrelevant. But Tanaka had dug deeper, accessing archived recordings of those early summits, watching the human observers as they sat in their seats and took notes. They had not looked bored. They had looked angry. The humans had attended the summits during a period when the Concord was debating how to respond to a different crisis, a species called the Melthari, who were being systematically exterminated by their neighbors. The debates had followed the same pattern she had witnessed today: condemnation without consequence, outrage without action. The Melthari were eventually wiped out entirely while the Conqueror deliberated. The human observers had watched it all. They had taken their notes, and then they had gone home and never returned. Tanaka pulled up the communication logs from that era. The humans had sent a single message to the Concord after their final summit appearance. It was brief and formal. The Terran Confederation thanks the Galactic Concord for its hospitality and declines further participation at this time. Nothing more, no explanation, no complaints, just silence. 80 years of silence. Tanaka leaned back in her chair and thought about what she had learned. The humans were not isolationists. They were not primitive. They were watching. They had been watching all along, gathering information, studying the galaxy and its power structures. The question was, what were they planning to do with that knowledge? She began typing a report, knowing that it would probably be ignored like all her other reports. But something in her gut told her that this was important. Something was coming. She could feel it out in the darkness between stars, far from any world that the Concord had bothered to map. A fleet was gathering. 1,000 ships hung in the void, their running lights dimmed, their crews waiting in disciplined silence. They had been waiting for a long time. Soon they would wait no longer. Admiral Chen Wei stood at the observation window of the Prometheus, watching the stars in silence. The flagship of the Terran defense fleet was enormous, nearly 3 km from bow to stern, and it carried enough firepower to level a small moon. But to Chen, it felt like home. She had served in the fleet for 40 years, rising through the ranks from a young ensign on a patrol corvette to the commander of humanity's most powerful military force. She had never fired a shot in anger against another species. No human had. That was about to change. Admiral, the intelligence briefing is ready. Chen turned from the window to face her aide, Commander Marcus Webb. He was young for his position, barely 50. But he had proven himself a capable officer and a trustworthy confidant. Show me, Chen said. They walked together to the ship's command center, a vast, circular room filled with displays and control stations. The senior staff was already assembled, their faces grim. They had all seen the preliminary reports. The main display activated, showing a recording from the Concord summit that had concluded 3 days ago. Chen watched as Ambassador Breath made his contemptuous remarks about humanity. She watched as the assembly debated the Vickery expansion and ultimately did nothing. She had seen variations of this recording for decades, same as always, said Captain Reynolds, the ship's executive officer. Talk and more talk. Not quite the same, and Commander Webb said. He adjusted the display to show a different image, a space station in a remote system far from any major trade routes. This is Sanctuary Station. It was established 12 years ago as a refuge for survivors fleeing Vickery conquest. Currently, it houses approximately 50,000 beings from 30 different species. Chen knew about Sanctuary Station. Humanity's intelligence network had been tracking it since its founding. It was one of the few places in the galaxy where the victims of the hegemony could find safety. The Vickery have found it. Webb continued. A battle fleet departed their territory 6 days ago. Based on their trajectory, they will reach Sanctuary Station in approximately 18 hours. The room fell silent. Everyone understood what a Vickery fleet would do to a station full of refugees. There would be no mercy. The survivors would be killed or enslaved, in Sanctuary Station would be destroyed as a message to anyone else who might try to help the hegemony's victims. What is the Conqueror's response? Chen asked, though she already knew the answer. The Concord has called an emergency session to discuss the situation. Based on past patterns, they will debate for several days before issuing a statement of concern, by which time 50,000 people will be dead. Yes, Admiral. Chen looked around the room at her officers. These were people she had served with for years, people she trusted with her life. They had all trained for this moment. They had all accepted that it would eventually come, but knowing something was coming and facing it directly were very different things. Before we proceed, she said, I want to remind everyone why we are here. I want to make sure we all understand what we are about to do. She walked to the center of the room where a holographic display showed the territory of the Terran Confederation, a small cluster of stars near the edge of the galaxy. It looked insignificant compared to the vast empires that dominated galactic politics. 80 years ago, a conquered survey ship discovered our planet. We were just beginning to explore beyond our own solar system. We were young and naive, and we were excited to learn that we were not alone in the universe. Chen touched the display, and it expanded to show the broader galaxy. They invited us to join their civilization. They showed us the wonders of the conquered, the great stations and the trade routes and the alliance of hundreds of species. We sent observers to their summits, eager to learn how such a diverse community could work together in peace. The display changed again, showing archive footage from those early summits. What we learned broke our hearts. We saw a civilization that had convinced itself that injustice was acceptable if the cost of stopping it was too high. We saw powerful species exploit weak ones while the conquered looked away. We saw entire populations condemned to slavery because no one was willing to take risks to save The footage showed the Melari crisis, the debates that went nowhere, the species that died while the galaxy watched. The Melthari were exterminated, while the Conquered held meetings, 12 billion beings wiped from existence, and the Conquered did nothing except express its deep concern. Chen paused, letting the weight of that history settle over the room. Our leaders made a decision. We would not join a system that permitted such horrors. We would not lend our legitimacy to an alliance built on comfortable indifference, but we also knew that we were too weak to challenge the existing order. If we spoke out, we would be dismissed or crushed, so we stayed silent, said Captain Reynolds. We stayed silent, Chen agreed, but we did not stay idle. The display changed to show humanity's hidden infrastructure. Shipyards carved into asteroids, research stations concealed in gas giant atmospheres, training facilities scattered across a dozen moons, all of it built in secret, all of it invisible to Conquered sensors. For 80 years we prepared, we studied every species in the Conquered, learned their technologies, identified their weaknesses. We built a fleet that could challenge any power in the galaxy, and we watched. The display showed decades of intelligence gathering, Bikari atrocities documented in horrifying detail, slave markets and death camps in Conquered worlds. We watched the Vicary conquer and enslave. We watched the Conquered do nothing. We recorded everything, waiting for the moment when we could finally act. Why did we wait so long? Asked the young lieutenant. If we had this power, why didn't we use it sooner? Chen had asked herself that question many times over the years. The answer was never easy, because power without wisdom is just another form of tyranny. If we had intervened before we were ready, before we understood the galaxy and its politics, we would have become conquerors ourselves. We would have traded one injustice for another. She looked at the young officer with understanding. It is easy to use power. It is hard to use it well. We waited because we needed time to learn how to be strong without becoming the monsters we opposed. The main display returned to the image of Sanctuary Station and the Rickery fleet. Approaching it, 50,000 people will die in 18 hours unless someone acts. Conquered will not act. They never do. Chen straightened to her full height. Today humanity acts. Today we show the galaxy what we have become, not conquerors, not tyrants, protectors. She turned to her communications officer. Signal the fleet, all ships to combat. Readiness, we jump in 12 hours, Admiral. The entire fleet, the officer's voice carried a note of surprise. That's over 1,000 ships. I am aware of our numbers, Lieutenant. Yes, Admiral. Signaling now. Across the void in hidden anchorages scattered throughout human space, ships came to life, engines warmed, weapons charged, crews reported to their stations. 1,000 vessels, each one a marvel of engineering that the galaxy had never seen, prepared to reveal themselves. Chen returned to the observation window and watched the stars. Somewhere out there, 50,000 refugees huddled in fear, waiting for death to come. They did not know that help was on the way. They did not know that humanity had been watching them, caring about their fate, preparing for this moment. Commander Webb joined her at the window. Admiral, once we do this, there's no going back. The galaxy will know what we are. They will fear us. Let them, Chen said quietly. Fear can be useful, but I hope they will also Understand. Understand what? That we did not build this fleet to conquer, we build it to protect. Every ship, every weapon, every soldier exists for one purpose: to stand between the innocent and those who would harm them. She paused. The galaxy has had empires. It has had alliances built on mutual profit. What it has never had is a guardian, and that's what we are. Chen smiled, but there was no joy in it. That is what we have chosen to become, not rulers, not masters, guardians. She turned to face Webb directly. In 12 hours we will save 50,000 lives, and then we will face the consequences of revealing ourselves. The conquered will demand explanations. Some species will see us as a threat. Others will try to use us for their own purposes. How do we handle that? One step at a time. First, we save the refugees. Then we tell the galaxy who we are and what we stand for. After that, she shrugged, after that we see what kind of future we can build together. The hours passed slowly. Chen reviewed battle plans, consulted with her captains, and tried to rest when she could. Sleep did not come easily. She kept thinking about the moment of revelation when 1,000 human warships would appear out of nowhere and change the galaxy forever. Finally, the countdown reached 0. All ships report ready, Commander Webb announced. Fleet is prepared to jump. Chen took her seat in the command chair and looked around the bridge one last time. Every face showed determination. Every officer was ready. Signal the fleet, she said. Execute jump. The stars stretched and blurred as 1,000 ships tore through the fabric of space, racing toward a station full of frightened refugees and a Verkari fleet that had no idea what was coming. Humanity was done being silent. Sanctuary Station was dying. The Verkari fleet had arrived 2 hours ahead of schedule, catching the station's defenders completely off guard. Not that there had been much to guard with. A handful of converted cargo ships and a few outdated patrol craft faced a battle group of 60 warships, including 3 heavy cruisers and the flagship of fleet. Commander Torex himself, station master Priyath, watched the tactical display with growing despair. She was old, her scales faded to a dull gray, and she had seen too much death in her long life. She had founded Sanctuary Station 12 years ago as a place where refugees could find peace. Now it would become their tomb. The Verkari are demanding our surrender, her communications officer reported. They say they will accept the station's population as property of the hegemony. Slavery, that was what the polite language meant. 50,000 beings who had already lost everything would now lose their freedom as well. How long until conquered? Response, Prith asked, though she knew the answer. The emergency session is still in progress. No resolution has been reached. Of course not. The conquered would debate while her people died. That was how things worked. In this galaxy, the powerful did as they pleased and the weak suffered. Tell the Rickery we need time to consider their terms. Perlet said, buy us as many minutes as you can. It would not matter. Minutes would not change the outcome, but minutes might let some of the children reach the escape pods. Minutes might let a few families say goodbye. On the bridge of the Verkari flagship Dominance fleet commander Torex smiled at the station's pathetic attempt to delay. He was a veteran of a dozen conquests, and he had learned to enjoy these moments. The fear of the weak was almost as satisfying as their Eventual submission, they ask for time. His communications officer reported. Give them 10 minutes, Torex said, then. Begin the assault, I want this finished. Before the Conquered grows a spine, his officers laughed at the joke. Conquered growing a spine was about as likely as stars going dark. Torex settled into his command chair and watched the tactical display. Sanctuary station hung in space like a wounded animal surrounded by his fleet. In an hour, perhaps less, it would be over. The refugees would be sorted, the useful ones sent to work camps, the rest disposed of. Another victory for the hegemony. Commander, his sensor officer said. Suddenly, I'm reading something unusual. Define unusual. There are energy signatures appearing at the edge of the system, many of them I don't recognize. The pattern, Torex frowned and looked at the display. His sensor officer was right, something was happening at the system's outer boundary, beyond the range of detailed scans. The signatures were strange, unlike any fold space emergence he had ever seen. How many contacts, he asked. The sensor officer's face went pale. Commander, I'm reading. Over 1,000 individual signatures. That's impossible. I'm confirming now. The officer's hands moved frantically over his console. Commander, there. Resolving ships, 1,000 ships. Incoming at high speed. Before Torex could respond, space itself seemed to tear open. Points of light blazed across the void as vessel after vessel dropped out of fold space in perfect formation. The ships were huge, far larger than anything in his fleet, and they moved with a precision that spoke of technology beyond his understanding. What is this? Torex demanded. Who ships are these? Unknown design, Commander. No matches in our database. The sensor officer's voice shook. They're surrounding the station. They're there surrounding us. 1,000 ships formed a sphere around Sanctuary Station, their weapons trained outward toward the Rickery fleet. Torex had never seen anything like it. No power in the galaxy could field such a force. No power in the galaxy had ships this advanced. His communications console activated with an incoming transmission. This is Admiral Chen Wei of the Terran Defense Fleet. The voice was calm, controlled, and spoke perfect Galactic standard. Torex felt something he had not experienced in years. Fear. We are not here to negotiate, the voice continued. We are not here to join your debates. We are here because 50,000 people will die if no one acts. Rickery commanders, you have 10 minutes to withdraw from this system. Your ships will not be harmed if you comply. This is your only warning. The transmission ended. Torex stared at his display, his mind racing. Humans, the primitive species that have been hiding at the edge of the galaxy for 80 years, the species that everyone dismissed as irrelevant. They had built this. Commander, what are your orders? Torex looked at the 1,000 ships surrounding his fleet. They were beautiful in a terrifying way, sleek and deadly, and clearly built for war. If the humans had wanted to destroy his ships, they could have done so already. Instead, they had offered a warning. For a moment, Torex considered retreat. Survival was more important than pride, and only a fool fought against impossible odds. Then he thought about what retreat would mean. The hegemony did not accept failure. If he returned home with his fleet intact, but his mission incomplete, he would face execution. Better to die in battle than in disgrace. All ships attack. Formation, he ordered, target the nearest human vessels, show these primitives what the hegemony does too. Those who interfere with our conquest. His officers hesitated, several of them. Looked like they wanted to argue, but discipline held, and the Valkyrie fleet began to move. On the bridge of the Prometheus, Admiral Chen watched the Valkyrie ships maneuver into attack position. She had expected this. Valkyrie were proud, too proud to surrender without a fight. It was going to cost them, all ships weapons free. She said, disable, do not destroy. I want those crews alive. The battle began. It lasted 4 minutes and 23 seconds. The human fleet moved with perfect coordination, every ship knowing exactly where to be and what to do. Their weapons were something the galaxy had never seen, precision beams that could target individual systems without damaging the rest of a ship. Engines went dark, weapons arrays went silent. Shield generators overloaded and shut down. One by one, the Valkyrie ships went dead in space, not destroyed, disabled. Their crews were alive, their hulls intact, but they could not fight and could not flee. The dominance was they. Last to fall, Torex watched in disbelief as his ship systems failed around him. His weapons would not fire, his engines would not respond, even his communications were jammed. Then a new transmission came through. Fleet Commander Torex. Admiral Chen's voice said, your ships have been disabled. Your crews will be detained and returned to your government after processing. Your wounded will receive medical care. But your conquest ends here. The channel close. Torex sat in the darkness of his dead bridge and tried to understand what had just happened. His fleet, 60 warships strong, had been defeated in less than 5 minutes. The humans had not even suffered a scratch. What had they been doing for 80 years on Sanctuary Station? Prolith watched the tactical display with tears running down her face. The Valkyrie fleet was dark, disabled, surrounded by human ships. Medical shuttles were already launching from the human carriers, heading toward the crippled Valkyrie vessels to treat their wounded. Station master, her communications officer, said, we're receiving a transmission from the human flagship. Put it through. A human face appeared on her screen, a woman older, with gray hair and calm eyes. Station master, this is Admiral Chen Wei. Sanctuary Station is safe. We will be deploying humanitarian support vessels to assist with any needs you may have. Please do not be alarmed by our presence. Pry tried to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. Finally she managed to ask the question that burned in her mind. Why did you help us? Admiral Chen smiled, and there was genuine warmth in it. Because someone had to, because we could, because this is what we believe in. But you owe us nothing. We are not your people today. You are, Chen said simply. Rest, Station master. You are under our protection. Now the transmission ended. Prel sank into her chair and wept. For 12 years she had watched the galaxy ignore the suffering of refugees. For 12 years she had begged the conquered for help that never came. Now from nowhere salvation had arrived. She did not understand it. She was not sure she ever would, but for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something she had forgotten existed. Hope far away on Velithos Prime. The conquered emergency session had descended into chaos. News of the battle had arrived minutes ago, and the delegates were still trying to process what they had heard. 1,000 Human warships, the Vickery fleet. Disabled in minutes, technology that made the most advanced conquered vessels look like toys. Ambassador Verith stood at his podium, his scales shifting through colors that had no name: fear, rage, disbelief. This is an act of war. He shouted, the humans have attacked a hegemony fleet without provocation. Without provocation, the Salathi representative shot back, your fleet was about to massacre 50,000 refugees. Those refugees were harboring enemies of the hegemony. We had every right. You had no right to anything. The voice cut through the chaos, commanding instant silence. High Chancellor Morv stood at the central podium, her silver robes catching the light. Her face showed no emotion, but her eyes burned with an intensity that made even breath fall. Silent, for 80 years we dismissed the humans, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the great hall. We called them primitive, we called them irrelevant, we assumed that their silence meant weakness. She paused, letting her words sink in. We were wrong. She touched her console and the main display activated. It showed the battle recorded by conquered observation satellites, 1,000 ships emerging from fold space, the Vickery fleet collapsing in minutes, medical teams treating wounded enemy soldiers. Humans have revealed themselves, Morph continued, and now we must decide how to respond. But before we begin that debate, I suggest we consider something. Carefully, she looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of delegates from 100 different species. The humans could have destroyed the Vickery fleet. They chose instead to disable it. They could have let the Vickery crews die in space. They chose instead to save them. She let that thought hang in the air. Whatever the humans are, whatever they want, they are not like us. They do not think like us, and perhaps that is exactly what this galaxy needs. Chamber erupted in argument, but Morph was no longer listening. She was thinking about what came next, about a meeting she would need to arrange with Admiral Chen, about the future of a galaxy that had just changed forever. The humans were no longer watching from the shadows. They had arrived. Medical bay, aboard the human carrier ship, Mercy was quiet except for the soft beeping of monitoring equipment. Row after row of beds held wounded Vickery soldiers, their injuries treated, their pain managed, their lives saved by the very species they had been sent to conquer. Lieutenant Kareth lay in one of those beds, staring at the ceiling with eyes that could not quite believe what they were seeing. 12 hours ago he had been preparing to assault a refugee station. Now he was a prisoner of war, and his captors were bringing him water. A human approached his bed. She was small by Vickery standards, with soft brown skin and gentle hands. She wore the uniform of a medical officer and carried a tray of food. How are you feeling? She asked in perfect Galactic standard. Kath did not answer immediately. He was trying to understand the situation, and understanding would not come. His ship had been disabled in the battle, its life support failing. He had expected to die in the cold darkness of space. Instead, human rescue teams had cut through the hull and carried him to safety. Why? He finally asked. The word came out rough, his voice damaged by smoke inhalation. Why? What? Why? Help me. I am your enemy. My people would have killed everyone on that station. He paused. We would have killed you. Human medic sat down her tray and pulled up a chair beside his bed. You were Following orders, she said you were. Doing what your commanders told you to. Do, that doesn't make it right, but it doesn't make you evil either, that's not. An answer, no I suppose it isn't. She was quiet for a moment. We help you. Because that's who we chose to be. We built our fleet to protect the innocent. But we also built it with the understanding that the people on the other side of a battle are still people. You have families, you have dreams, you have value. Kareth shook his head. Slowly, the hegemony would not show such mercy. If your ships had been disabled, our medics would not have saved your wounded. Your survivors would have been enslaved or executed. I know then why. Because we're not you. The words were simple, but they carried weight. We could be like you. We have the power to do whatever we want, but we chose differently. We chose to be better. Kareth was silent for a long time after that. He had spent his entire life being told that strength meant domination, that power meant control, that mercy was weakness. Now he was lying in a bed on an enemy ship being cared for by people his culture had taught him to despise. And everything he thought he knew was crumbling. What will happen to us? He asked finally. You'll be held until negotiations are complete, then return to your government. No one will be harmed. No one will be forced to do anything against their will. She stood and gestured at the tray she had brought. Eat something. You need to recover your strength. She walked away to check on other patients, leaving Kareth alone with his thoughts and a bowl of warm food that smelled surprisingly good. On the other side of the galaxy, High Chancellor Morv's shuttle approached the human flagship Prometheus. She had requested this meeting personally against the advice of her Security Council, and Admiral Chen had agreed without hesitation. Shuttle bay of the Prometheus was enormous, large enough to hold a dozen conquered vessels. Human officers in crisp uniforms guided her ship to a landing pad, and when the hatch opened, a delegation was waiting to greet her. Admiral Chen stood at the front, flanked by her senior officers. She was smaller than Morph had expected, but there was a quiet strength in her posture that commanded respect. High Chancellor, Chen said, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. Welcome aboard. Morph took the offered hand carefully. Human customs were strange, but she had studied them. Admiral Chen, thank you for agreeing to meet with me. The conquered deserves an explanation. After 80 years of silence, I imagine you have questions more than you can imagine. Chen led her through the ship's corridors to a private conference room. The walls were lined with windows that looked out on the stars, and a simple table occupied the center of the space. No guards, no weapons, just two leaders facing each other across a table. Ask your questions, Chen said. Morph sat down and organized her thoughts. She had prepared for this conversation for days, but now that the moment had arrived, she found herself uncertain where to begin. Why did you hide? She asked finally. Your technology is clearly superior to anything in the conquered. You could have dominated galactic politics from the beginning. Why stay silent? Chen smiled, but there was sadness in it. We attended your summits 80 years ago. We watched how the conquered operated. We saw debates that went nowhere while people died. We saw powerful species exploit weaker ones while the Alliance looked away. She paused. We decided that we did not want to be part of that system, so you chose isolation. We chose preparation. There's a difference, Chen leaned forward if we had revealed ourselves before we were ready, before we understood the galaxy and its politics. We would have become just another empire. We would have used our power for conquest, because that is what power does when it lacks wisdom. And now, what do you want now? We want to build something better. A galaxy where the strong protect the weak instead of exploiting them. A civilization where debates actually lead to action. Suffering is not ignored because intervention is inconvenient. Morph considered this carefully. Pretty words, but how do I know you won't simply impose your vision by force? Your fleet could crush the conquered if you chose to attack. Yes, it could. Chen's voice was calm. Matter of fact, we won't. We did not spend 80 years building this fleet so we could become tyrants. We built it so we could be guardians. Guardians of what? Of everyone, every species, every civilization, every individual being who needs protection. The galaxy has had empires. It has had alliances built on mutual profit. What it has never had is a power that exists solely to defend those who cannot defend themselves. Morph was quiet for a long moment. In her centuries of life, she had met many leaders, heard many speeches, witnessed many promises. Most of them had been lies, but there was something in Chen's eyes, something genuine that made her want to believe. What do you want from the conquered? She asked. Partnership. Not submission, not tribute, not control. Partnership. We want to work with species who share our values, who believe that the strong have a responsibility to protect the weak. Chen stood and walked to the window. Verkari are not going to stop. This defeat will only make them more determined. Eventually they will rebuild their fleet and try again. The only way to stop them permanently is to build something strong enough to make aggression impossible. A new alliance, a coalition open to any species willing to commit to its principles. Humanity will be one member among many, not the ruler. We have no interest in governing anyone but ourselves. Morph rose and joined Chen at the window. The stars stretched out before them, countless points of light representing countless worlds, countless peoples, countless possibilities. There are those in the conquered who will never accept this, she said. They will see you as a threat no matter what you say. I know they will have to make their own choices. We will not force anyone to join us, but we will not allow anyone to continue the old patterns of exploitation either. The days of standing by while innocents suffer are over. That sounds like an ultimatum. Call it a statement of principle. We have chosen what we will and will not tolerate. Others can choose how to respond. Morph turned to face Chen directly. I have been the High Chancellor for 60 years. I have watched the conquered fail over and over to live up to its ideals. I have watched species be enslaved while we debated the proper response. I have hated myself for my inability to change things. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. I do not know if I trust you, Admiral. I do not know if your vision is possible, but I know that the old way is broken. If there is even a chance of building something better, I want to be part of it. Chen smiled, and this time there was warmth in it. Then, let's begin. 3 days later, Admiral Chen addressed the Galactic conquered. The Great Hall was packed, every seat filled, every species represented. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut. Some delegates looked at Chen with Fear, others looked at her with hope. Most simply looked confused. Chen stood at the central podium, alone, unarmed, facing the judgment of a galaxy. I know. You have questions, she began. I know. You're afraid. A new power has emerged from nowhere with technology you do not understand and intentions you cannot guess. In your position I would be afraid too. She looked around the chamber, meeting as many eyes as she could. Let me tell you who we are. 80 years ago, humanity discovered that we were not alone in the universe. We were invited to join your civilization, and we sent observers to learn about your ways. What we learned broke our hearts. The display behind her activated, showing images that many in the chamber would rather forget. The Malari crisis, the debates that went nowhere, the species that died while the conquered did nothing. We watched 12 billion beings die while this body discussed the proper response. We watched the Rickery enslave millions while you debated sanctions. We watched atrocity after atrocity, and we made a decision. Chen's voice hardened. We decided that we would never be part of a system that permitted such horrors. But we also decided that when we finally acted, we would not become the monsters we opposed. She gestured, and the display changed to show the battle at Sanctuary Station, the 1,000 ships, the Rickery fleet disabled in minutes, the medical teams treating wounded enemies. We built our fleet to protect the innocent. We built it with the power to destroy any force that threatens the helpless, but we also built it with the discipline to show mercy, to save lives even when destruction would be easier. That is who we are. That is what we stand for. Chen paused, letting her words sink in. I am not here to threaten you. I am not here to demand your submission. I am here to offer you a choice. You can continue as you have been, debating while innocents suffer, maintaining a status quo that benefits the powerful at the expense of the weak, or you can join us in building something new. What exactly are you proposing? Ambassador Breath demanded. His voice was hostile, but Chen could hear the fear beneath it. A coalition open to any species willing to commit to its principles, that the strong must protect the weak, that aggression cannot be tolerated, that suffering must be answered with action. Humanity will be one voice among many, not the ruler of anything. We seek partners, not subjects, and if we refuse, then you refuse. We will not force anyone to join, but we will also not allow the old patterns to continue. If another species is threatened, if another population faces slavery or extinction, we will act with or without the conquered approval. The chamber erupted in argument, but Chen simply stood and waited for the noise to subside. You have 80 years of silence to consider, she said finally. 80 years during which humanity watched and learned and prepared. We could have acted sooner. We chose to wait until we were ready to do it right. She looked around the chamber one last time. Now we are ready. The question is, are you? She stepped down from the podium and walked out of the great hall, leaving 200 species to debate their response to a future that had already arrived. Galaxy would never be the same. 1 year had passed since the battle at Sanctuary Station, and the galaxy had transformed. The Verkari hegemony was no more, not because humanity had destroyed it, but because its own subjects had risen up against it. When the conquered peoples saw that resistance was possible, when they learned that a power existed that would protect them, they found courage they had forgotten they possessed. world after world threw off hegemony rule. The great empire collapsed from within, and the Ricari themselves were left to face the consequences of their centuries of cruelty. The Galactic conquered had fractured. Some species clung to the old ways, retreating into their own territories and hoping to avoid the changes sweeping through civilization. Others had joined the new coalition that humanity had helped create, committing themselves to principles they had long claimed to believe but never practiced. Admiral Chen Wei stood at the observation window of a space station orbiting a world called New Dawn. It had been a Vickery mining colony 6 months ago, worked by slaves from a dozen different species. Now it was a sanctuary, a place where former slaves could heal and rebuild their lives. Human volunteers worked alongside beings from across the galaxy, building homes and schools and hospitals. Medical teams treated injuries that some victims had carried for years. Teachers helped children learn to read and write in their own languages, skills that the hegemony had forbidden. Commander Webb joined Chen at the window. He had aged. In the past year, they all had building. Something new was harder than tearing something old down. The Salathi Republic has formally joined the coalition, he reported. That brings our total membership to 47 species. Good. What about the holdouts? The usual. Ambassador Breath is still trying to rally opposition, but no one is listening anymore. The Colossi Dominion is more concerned with internal politics than external threats. Chen nodded. She had expected resistance, and she had prepared for it. What she had not expected was how quickly things would change once the first barriers fell. There's something else, Webb said. Former Fleet Commander Torex has requested an audience with you. He's been released from detention and returned to Verkari space, but he says he has something important to discuss. That was unexpected. Torex had been the commander of the fleet that attacked Sanctuary Station. His capture had been one of the key moments of the battle. What does he want? He didn't say, but he traveled here personally to make the request. Chen considered for a moment. Bring him to my office. Let's hear what he has to say. 30 minutes later, Torex entered Chen's private office. He was thinner than he had been a year ago. His scales faded. His bearing diminished. Defeat had changed him in ways that went deeper than the physical. Adam Chen, he said, his voice formal but respectful. Thank you for agreeing to see me, former fleet commander. Chen gestured to a chair. Please sit. Torex sat heavily, as if the weight of his past was pressing down on him. For a long moment he simply stared at his hands, gathering his thoughts. I spent my entire life believing in the hegemony, he said. Finally, I believe that strength was the only virtue, that power existed to be used, that the strong had the right to rule the weak. I killed for those beliefs. I conquered for them. I enslaved innocent beings because I thought it was the natural order of things. He looked up at Chen. And then you defeated my fleet in 4 minutes without killing a single one of my soldiers. You captured me and treated my wounds. You fed me and gave me water and spoke to me as if I was a person instead of an enemy. You are a person, Chen said. Simply, that's just it. I didn't understand that. I didn't understand that enemies could be treated with dignity, that victory didn't require cruelty, that power could be wielded with compassion. Torex shook his head. In your prison, I had nothing to do but think. I thought about every slave I had taken, every world I had conquered, every atrocity I had committed in the name of the hegemony, and I realized that I had wasted my entire life serving a lie. Chen listened without interrupting. She had seen this before in other Ricari prisoners who had been transformed by their experience of human mercy. It was one of the things that gave her hope for the future. The hegemony is gone, Torex continued. My people are scattered and broken. We have nothing left except our shame. He straightened in his chair, some of his old military bearing returning, but I have decided that shame can be the beginning of something new. I have come to offer my services to the coalition. That was surprising. In what capacity? Whatever capacity you think is useful. I know Vickery military tactics better than anyone alive. I know the locations of hidden weapons caches, the identities of war criminals who escaped justice, the secrets that the hegemony kept even from its own people. He paused, and I can speak to other Vickery, the ones who are lost and confused, who don't know how to live in a galaxy without conquest. I can show them that change is possible. Chen studied the old warrior carefully. She had learned to read people over her long career, and what she saw in Torex was genuine. The arrogance was gone, burned away by defeat and reflection. What remained was someone searching for redemption. You understand that many species will never forgive the Ricari for what was done to them. She said, you may spend the rest of your life being hated for crimes you cannot undo. I understand, but I have to try. I have to do something to balance the scales, even if the balance can never be fully restored. He met her eyes directly. You humans have a saying, I'm told, something about the longest journey beginning with a single step. Chen smiled. We do say that. Then let this be my first step. Whatever you need, whatever I can contribute, I am willing. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for the chance to earn it. Chen was quiet for a long moment, considering. Finally she nodded. We have a program for former hegemony soldiers who want to make amends. You would start at the bottom, doing whatever work is needed, following orders instead of giving them. It would not be easy. I did not expect it to be. Then welcome to the coalition, Torex. Let's see what you're made of when you're building instead of destroying. That evening, Chen attended a ceremony on New Dawn surface. A new community center was being dedicated, built by volunteers from a dozen species, designed to serve as a gathering place for the settlement's growing population. The crowd was diverse in ways that would have been unthinkable a year ago. Former slaves stood beside former masters. Species that had been at war for centuries worked together to string lights and arrange chairs. Children played together without any awareness of the historical barriers their parents had known. A young woman approached Chen as the ceremony concluded. She was from one of the species that had been conquered by the hegemony, her people reduced to a few thousand survivors before the coalition liberated them. Admiral Chen, she was nervous, her translator working overtime to convert her native tongue. May I speak with you? Of course. I wanted to thank you. My family went. We were slaves for 3 generations. My grandmother died in the mines. My mother worked until her body broke. I was born in chains. Tears filled her eyes. And now my children will be born free because of what you and your people did. Chen felt her own eyes stinging. We did what anyone should have done a long time ago, but no one else did. You did. The young woman reached out and took Chen's hand. Is it true that your people waited 100 years to act? That you could have come sooner? It was a question Chen had been asked many times, and she still struggled with the answer. Yes, it's true. We could have revealed ourselves earlier. Why didn't you? Chen looked out at the crowd, at the former slaves and the former soldiers learning to live together, at the children who would never know the horrors their parents had survived, because we would have come as conquerors, not liberators. We needed time to learn how to be strong without becoming the monsters we opposed. The young woman considered this. And now? What happens now? Chen smiled, remembering a conversation with High Chancellor Morph a year ago when everything had seemed uncertain and the future had been impossible to predict. Now we build something worth protecting. The ceremony ended and the crowd dispersed into the warm evening air. Chen walked through the settlement, watching families return to their homes, watching lights come on in windows, watching a community take shape out of the ruins of empire. A year ago, humanity had arrived at Sanctuary Station with 1,000 warships and changed the galaxy forever. But the warships were not what mattered. What mattered was what came after: the choices, the principles, the hard work of building something new. The coalition was not perfect. It never would be. There would be conflicts and setbacks, and moments when the old patterns tried to reassert themselves, but there would also be progress, slow and steady, toward a future where the strong protected the weak instead of exploiting them. Chen returned to her shuttle as the stars came out overhead. She had work to do tomorrow: meetings with new member species, negotiations with holdouts, plans for the next phase of reconstruction. The work would never truly be finished, but that was all right. That was the nature of hope. The galaxy had been ruled by empires for millennia. It had been governed by alliances built on mutual profit and calculated self-interest. It had never had a guardian, a power that existed solely to protect those who could not protect themselves. Now it did, and somewhere in the vastness of space, aboard the Prometheus and 1,000 other ships, humanity stood ready to answer whenever the innocent called for help. Not as conquerors, not as masters, not as rulers of anything but themselves, but as something the galaxy had never seen before and might never fully understand: as guardians. The empty chair at the conquered summit was occupied now. Humanity had finally taken its seat among the stars, and the work of building a better future had only just begun.